Let's continue with our topic of lingua franca. As I said, lingua franca is a language that is used among people who speak different language. So, in the worldwide, as you can see on this world web, there are 7 lingua franca. And you can see the green part is the countries where the English is usually used as a lingua franca. And you can see the strong presence of English used as a lingua franca on the worldwide. So on this graph, you can see that English is often used as the lingua franca for many peoples in different countries for the global society. So the topic is make yourself understood in English. So in another word, we are trying to bridge. There are 2 different versions of English. Then how we can narrow the differences. So this is what I quoted in our former session. This is a survey result by the Canning Consulting Company. Canning Consulting Company is a British company that they had some hundreds of business managers from 26 countries, and they had a survey. And the survey result is very surprising because most of them agree the usefulness of English as a common medium of communication. However, the majority of they prefer doing so with other non-native speakers. In other words, the Asian speakers, they prefer to speak to another Asian speakers with English. And also, about 60% of them found that when they are communicating with the American speakers, the British speakers, they found it more difficult to understand the American speakers. And 60% believe that native English speakers, they unfairly use their linguistic advantage. So this survey results is very, it leaves us to think about it. So what's the problem? So this is a mini case about what's the problem when the native speakers and non-native speakers, they gather together for international meeting, because when English is used as a common language in an international meeting, it's usually native speakers, they are talking a lot. The problem is non-native speakers, they cannot understand what they are talking. Why? So we have talked about the differences between OE English and native English. So we are going to discuss why is it difficult for OE speakers to understand the L1 speakers. So this might be one example. If you are a Korean manager, then if you found some error, some mistake in the financial record, then the Korean manager would say like this: your numbers were not correct. Please correct them as soon as possible. So you might think, wow, his way of English is very direct, and there is no room of confusion. There is no misunderstanding. So it's so clear and accurate and concise. But how would you feel if your counterpart is the British people? The British people would say, what? I got the message here, but it is a little bit too straightforward, and there is no diplomacy, and there is no nuances, and it sounds too plain. That would be the typical reaction from the British speakers. For example, if you are the native speakers, for example, like the British managers in the same situation, he would say that it doesn't seem that your numbers do not add up to be 500,000. It may be in our best interest to clarify it before we put these numbers on the agenda of the meeting that will take place on May 15 in London. So you can see that there's very more information is embedded in this one, but it sounds a little bit too complicated. There are too wordy, because if the Korean manager see it, Why? Because the Korean manager will say they assume that there are some shared information. So you don't have to specify the May 15 in London or the numbers here. We already know. These are the information already shared, so we don't have to repeat. So the Korean manager would say, this is the simple idea. This is the most important message. He focused on the important message. Anyway, this is the way that there are some differences. So what is the priority when you're trying to communicate? The message is more important or the framing is more important? So even if the American and British, they belong to the same culture, however, the way they are using English, I got it wrong. Even if they are both Americans and British are the same L1 speakers, they still have different culture. So they would say the America is a low context culture and the British is a high context culture. We will not elaborate what is low context culture and high context culture. In next class, we will explain what it is. But for example, this is a case that the culture can affect the way they express English. So if you are low context America, they would say no dogs allowed. But if the British would say that we regret that in the interest of hygiene, dogs are not allowed on the premises. So if you are no context America, would say, please keep hands off door. But if you belong to high context British, they would say, obstructing the door causes delay and can be dangerous. So, if you can see, so there are not only the linguistic differences, sometimes it depends on the cultural differences. So then why lingua franca is easy, accurate, and clear, even if it sounds too plain? I'm talking about offshore English. Offshore English, it sounds too plain to American ears, but it is very clear when you are talking among the Asian speakers. First, language is culture bound. So non-native speakers cannot literally translate the culture bound idioms. So culture bound, we are taking some examples of culture bound idioms. The Americans understand the idioms because the idioms is something that is culturally based. So we are going to take an example in later. So this is text input. Here we are come back to this one. Why native English speaker should learn offshore English, and why offshore English speakers should upgrade a native English fluency when they are communicating with the American Brits. So when it talks about the need for us to need standard English, the case is clear. So we need to speak standard English. We should be serious. If you want to be serious about your career goal to become professor, you need to be serious about the form of English. And if you want to practice the law, and then you must be serious about standard English, or so you want to engage in business, sports marketing and media, and air traffic control and broadcast, then we must be serious about the standard English. So eligibility need comes first. So there is no doubt of it. However, you still understand that with the OE speakers should understand that they acknowledge there is a different varieties of English. Sometimes we need to adapt the way they will speak. So to the need of the person that we are addressing. The same is true, the native speakers. Native speakers, they should learn official English, especially if you're an American manager and your client is Indian, or your supplier is Korean, and your consumers are Japanese. You should be serious about offshore English. So it should be mutual, so we need to bridge the gap. So this is the example. Why? How different the OE English from the native English. So the verb prefer the native English. For example, these are the examples of native English speakers would say, where do you come from? But noun prefer the offshore English speakers would say, what is your hometown? The same is true. But who do you work for? But our OE speakers would say, what is your company? And native speakers would say, what do you do? But the offshore English speakers said, what's your job? And the native speakers would say, what are you going to do this evening? But offshore English speakers would say, what's your plan for the evening? And the American speakers would say, what are you aiming to achieve? But the Chinese English speaker would say, what are your objectives? And the American speakers would say, John is running the project. But the Korean speaker would say, John is a project manager. And the American speaker would say, who do you report to? But the Korean managers would say, who is your boss? So this is difference. So if you're American speakers, you should be aware that you should be aware of the differences to try to use the OE style of English. That would be the more efficient way of communication. And if you are the OE speakers, you should be aware of the way that the native speakers say, then you can comprehend what they say. So this is the way to bridge the gap between the two versions of English. And there is also differences in the preference of a verb. The native speakers, they tend to prefer the Germanic verb. And offshore English speakers, they tend to prefer the Latin-based verbs. So for example, the Koreans, they are familiar to use such Latin-based words: obtain, inform, select, and demonstrate. These are the examples of Latin-based verbs. So the Asian people tend to feel comfortable with the use of this Latin-based verbs. I don't know why, but it's their tendency. In contrast, that native speakers, they tend to feel more comfortable in using the Germanic verbs. For example, they are using the get or tell or pick or show. So these are the Germanic verbs. The Germanic verbs, I would say, this is Anglo-Saxon verbs. So Anglo-Saxon, the words tend to be most frequently used, the function words. Most of the function words and the basic words, the content words, they tend to be the old Saxon language, as we had discussed in former classes. And also the phrasal verb. As you say, the phrasal verb is two words makes one meaning with one meaning, and two words makes one meaning. And this is something very difficult for OE speakers to understand. So, for example, these are the expressions that using the phrasal verbs, and the offshore English is often are struggling to understand what it means. For example, we will have to put the meeting off. So then, but it will be easier for understand if OE speakers, we will have to postpone the meeting. So the price put me off, but the price was a disincentive. It will be more easier to understand for OE speakers. Can you get onto him? It's difficult for OE speakers to understand it. They would say, can you contact me? Or are you getting on okay with the project? Then can you, are you making progress with the project? And we've come up against a few problems, that we have encountered a few problems. And he went out of his way to help us. He made a special effort to help us. So if the Americans often use the phrasal verb, so it's easy. That's the way they make themselves misunderstood. It's very difficult for Korean English speakers to understand this phrasal verb. So it would be better for native speakers to refrain from use this phrasal verb if they are communicating with the offshore English speakers. So we are also talking about the first phrase. What is the first phrase? First phrase are pairs of words or pairs of phrases or in two languages or dialects or letters in two alphabets that look alike or sound familiar but differ significantly in meaning. These are the first phrases. Interesting expression, isn't it? So these are the many cases of the false phrase, the word of joint. So the French people and Dutch people, they work together for the post-merger management team, and they took part in a session. At the end, they all agreed that two bosses should issue a joint communication to all the managers in the division. Okay, that's it. So there was a misunderstanding in the use of joint. What's the meaning of joint for the French manager? What's the meaning of the joint for the Dutch manager? So there was some problem because joint, the meaning of joint was different. So, for example, the joint is a word that exists in both French and English. Indeed, it comes from the same Latin root. The trouble is it doesn't always mean the same thing in both languages. To the native speaker, a joint email means one single email that is co-authored by the two parties involved. To the French, however, it means separate but connected. So you can see there was a misunderstanding in the use of the joint communication. So these are the examples of the first phrases here. So you see on your left side there, these are the words. So actually, assist, candid, sympathetic, eventually, and concurrent. And actually, these words can be found in the native speakers, and also it can also found in many different non-native speakers. For example, actually means to native speakers, in fact, but it means differently to many non-native speakers. It means now or at the moment. So the word assist means to native speakers help, but to different native speakers it means attend. And also the word candid, that means to native speakers frank or honest, but it means to many non-native speakers naive. And sympathetic, that means to the native speakers is the ability to share emotion of others, but it means to many non-native speakers it is nice. So eventually the word that means to native speakers the finally, but it means to many non-native speakers, it means possibly if the occasion arises. And the word concurrent, that means to the native speakers existing or acting at the same time, but it means to many non-native speakers, it is competitive. So it's interesting. They look alike and they sound similar, however, the meaning different. So between the non-native speakers and the native speakers, they have a different meaning. So this is why the confusion arises among the two different groups of speakers over the meaning of the word. So we should be very cautious about the use of the first phrase. The phrase should be trustful, but sometimes the first phrase causes a problem. So so this is something different here. We don't have to that, we skip about that. So there is many. So there is many case about that shows that there is a difference between the British English and American English. So this is a word about high-level proposal. So what it means to American client is different from what it means the British counterpart. So there was a confusion over the meaning of a high-level proposal between the American client and the British manager. So because of the conflict, because of the differences, so they had some problem. So, for example, an American client and then asked a British manager to send over a high-level proposal for speaker training at a big marketing event. So the British manager thought, what does it mean, high-level proposal? So what does it mean? He hadn't. So he thought hard. Then it's what he wanted. So he thought maybe it must mean that want us document that would impress a senior decision maker. So he thought that, wow, this is something very detailed and long and comprehensive and proposal with a lot of details. He took it. So he spent a long time producing a comprehensive report. So he sent it to the American client. Then American client's reaction was surprising. He said, no, this is not what I wanted. What I meant was very short, a summary version that has only highlight points. That's what the high-level proposal means. So you can see, even if the same, they were British and American, they both are L1 speakers, but they have a different meaning when it comes to high-level proposal. There was a confusion arise. So in this case, what should be done? What should be done? So he should have asked the American client, what do you mean? So high-level proposal, what do you want me to produce? Is it a simple or correct and highlight, or a short one, or do you want a comprehensive one, or do you want a selective report? He should have asked it. This is the common sense of communication. If you have a question, you should ask so that you can remove the confusion. Everything should be clarified. So American and language to nation share in common, but often used to mean very different meanings. So indeed, some words and expressions could be said as false friends, as they mean one thing to the Americans, something completely different to the British. So these are some examples that the words of expression that meaning to Americans and meaning to British is different. For example, the word presently means to American at the present time, but it means to British soon. The word momentarily means to American very soon, but to British it means for a brief moment. And to slate, that means to American to schedule, but it means to the British to denigrate. So the expression, I'm not with you, it means to American, I don't support you, but it means to British, I don't understand you. And the word sanctioned, it means to American prohibited, but it means to British approved. You can see. So, this is a very interesting case that even though the British and the Americans, they share the common ancestor, however, how linguistically they have become apart, so even this same expression, they have different meaning. So there is some nuances in the word please or must. So non-native speakers are often unaware of negative impact they have on native speakers. For example, the please. So what kind of image do you have about this word please? So we have heard at school, in middle school, when we are learning English, that is a magic word for good manners. You should say please. In fact, please can be autocratic or official when it was spoken to native speakers. So please has a little negative nuance. So for native speakers, please do not walk on the grass. Please do not walk on the grass is not a request. If you say, please do not walk on the grass, so it's not a request but a bureaucratic instruction. Please is an extra that comes at the end of the sentence. So So we must be careful to use the please. Please do it now instead of please do it now, but it's better to say, can you do it now? So instead of saying, please send me a copy of the report, it would be better to say, will you send me a copy of the report, please? So instead of saying, please connect me to Mr. Smith, that is better to say, could you connect me to Mr. Smith? So the must also, that could sound bureaucratic to the ears of native speakers. For example, that you must work this Saturday, then would sound a little bureaucratic. It sounds like instruction, bossy. So it would be better to say, I'm afraid you are going to have to work this Sunday. And if you say, you must send me your report this Friday, it sounds bureaucratic. So it would be better if you say, I need to have your report this Friday. So instead of saying, we must meet at the office at 8:30 a.m., it's better to say, I suggest we meet at the office at 8:30. So also, okay. So we have talked about okay that comes from some African words. Then in some context, okay means different things to different people. This is interesting comparison. For native speakers, when you evaluate the program, would you say put okay, excellent, or very good? But to the native speakers, okay in this context means satisfactory or acceptable, but no more than that. In the UK, it is the faint phrase, weak approval. To say okay is to so lacking in enthusiasm and implies a certain dissatisfaction or disapproval. You can say that. So I used to work for the UK media. Then I sent the report to the editor. Then if the editor said, Amy, it's okay, then that is faint praise. That is a weak approval. My work was, he didn't like my report that much. Then it's okay. So he's lacking in enthusiasm, and it implies a certain dissatisfaction or disapproval of my report. So I could feel that he doesn't like my report that much. But non-native speakers, it means absolutely fine. If you German said it's okay, it's fine, you know. If Chinese say okay, it's fine. It means nothing at all to complain about it. So that's the difference. When I submit a report to German editor, if your German editor say okay, then I should be flattered. That is very good. So this is the nuances that exist between the British native speakers and the non-native speakers in the word of okay. So what is idiom? So idiom is a group of words whose meaning has been established by usage and can be deduced from the meaning of individual words. So idiom is cultural bound. So it is a group of words, but we can see that each word we cannot understand what it means. It has some, we should be culturally digging. It's a culture bound. It has some culturally implied meaning. So offshore English speakers, it's difficult to understand the idiom because it is culture bound. So I have a question. It's one of the examples of idioms. Can you understand what it means? So it's a question of swings and roundabouts. If Americans say that, maybe Americans would guess what it means, but Asians, they cannot understand. Actually, it means the two options are very similar. So if Americans say it's all gone pear-shaped, can you understand what it means? No. I can understand, we cannot understand. But it means everything has gone wrong, we have failed. And also idiom, his reaction was a bit over the top. So what does it mean? It means that his reaction was excessive, unreasonable, unsensible. So in the idiom, he is throwing a sickie. What does it mean? We cannot understand, but it means he's pretending to be ill so that he can take time off work. So I damned it with the faint praise. Can you understand? No. He commended it so enthusiastic a lie that he implied disapproval. He commended it so enthusiastically so that he implied disapproval. That means the faintest praise, this word, it sounds complicated, but faint approval is that implies a disapproval. And also this is a mini case about the confusion over the use of over the moon. So she is over the moon. Then students ran over to her and congratulated her on her miracle from God. The students thought that when they say over the moon, they said she was pregnant. In English, over the moon means very happy or delighted. In Botswana, a woman who jumps to the moon means the pregnant. So idioms come into and go out of fashion. Many British idioms are unintelligible to Americans and vice versa. So if you want to make yourself understood in English, it's probably best to try and avoid using idioms wherever you can. So finally, we are moving into what could be done to bridge the communication gap. The first thing is be observant. You should be an observer. You should be a mindful communicator. You should be watching what is his interest, what is his reaction, what is his constraint. You should be observant. You should be looking at the situation from the point of the other party. This is tip one, communication tip one. Second one is if you are communicating with the native speakers or OE speakers, you continue to check and to clarify. If you have a question, you should ask. If you don't understand, you must confess you don't understand. Don't pretend. The ignorance is no sin. Pretending to know is a sin. So in the case of a high-level proposal, you could have checked. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that expression. What do you mean by high-level proposal? You should have asked. Sorry, can I check that? Or when you say eventually, what do you mean? And does that mean finally or possibly? Or are you saying that you can't meet the deadline? Is that clear? Do you understand what I mean? So these are the expressions. We should keep asking the question if you don't understand. And also you should double check and numbers and days and time. Don't use acronyms. So this is very basic. And numbers and days, we should be clear about the numbers and date. We need to clarify. And avoid the long, complicated sentences. Keep it short and simple, especially when we are communicating with the offshore English speakers. Don't make it long and complicated. Restrict yourself to one idea per sentence. Think clearly about the words you can use and message you are trying to convey. And also use the signpost and summaries. This is a very important part of a communication tip when you are giving presentation. So we often use a signpost. A signpost is like a sign that shows the direction. So if you drive a car, this is either turn to right, turn to left, your destination is 10 kilometers away. This is the signpost. The same is true when you are giving the presentation. We always should know where we are, where we have been, and where we are going. So this is the signpost. For example, you can use such expressions as a signpost. Can I ask a question? Moving on to the second option, as I was saying earlier. And also, it often works if you use summarize. Before we move on, let's summarize what we have agreed so far. So if I've understood correctly, there are 3 action plans. This is the way that sometimes we must take a break, pause and summarize we have said. So to summarize and make it clear so everybody has good understanding of what I have said. So it is also important when you are communicating with non-native speakers or offshore English speakers, you should speak clearly, control your speed, and pause after a phrase or a sentence, not after each word, and control your volume. And also remember the human elements. So you will have to change the specification. It's better if you use such expressions. You will have to change the specification. I don't agree, I can't do that, or I appreciate that, I know this will be difficult for you, I'm sorry that. So control your body language. So we will get back to this body language in the later class. And also, language key takeaway, how to bridge the English gap. This is the conclusion. So use a noun instead of verb. If you are a native speaker and you are communicating with offshore speakers, replace a verb of Germanic origin with a Latin-based verb or noun. If you are a British speaker and you are communicating with the Asian speakers. And avoid, if you are British speakers, communicate with the offshore English speakers, avoid using too many phrasal verbs. And check the word that you have used is in a first friend. So remember, the American and British often use their common language to mean different things. And remember that please, must, and okay means different things to different people, and avoid using idioms. I think that that is all about it. To summarize a major point, I think this is a new word. Actually, we have been studying, we have been trained that we have learned the standard English, and the conclusion is we must carry on. We must carry on the production side of English. You should continue to English. You should be intelligible. English should be intelligible to everyone in every country. This is the bottom line principle of English speaking word. On the other hand, however, there is a different aspect. Is here, there is a new word is coming. There is a new linguistic word is coming. What is it? That is in offshore English. That is offshore lingua franca. So actually, offshore English is emerging as a true lingua franca in the international commerce. This is a very unique event that has recently started. So that's why the native speakers should be also understand and acknowledge the offshore English. They should learn offshore English if they want to effectively communicating with the offshore English speakers. Why? Because unique event. Why? Because there are more non-native speakers of English than the native speakers of English. And now that there is a game-changing event is taking place in the global society. And that's why the process should be mutual. It's not only the offshore English speakers trying to learn the standard English, but at the same time, the native speakers, they should acknowledge the differences of always speakers, and they should always try to reduce the gap between the two versions of English. So this is something unique that is happening. So I hope that we got the lessons here so we can better deal with this new reality, linguistic reality in the global society.